iniciar con la profesora Amira. Ella es la corresponsal de Haaretz para los territorios ocupados. Nació en Jerusalén en 1956. Ella es hija de 2 sobrevivientes del Holocausto y fue a la Universidad Hebrea de Jerusalén, en donde estudió la historia del nazismo y la relación de la izquierda europea con el Holocausto. Amira se unió a Haaretz en 1989 y ha estado en su actual posición desde 1993. Ella ha vivido en la ciudad de Ramallah desde 1997 y ha declarado que se siente privilegiada de conocer 2 sociedades, pero que a veces siente que es inútil. He estado escribiendo sobre la ocupación por 20 años y solamente pues se pone peor. Como corresponsal de los territorios, ella pasó 3 años viviendo en Gaza. Eso le sirvió para escribir su libro, Bebiendo el mar en Gaza, días y noches en una tierra bajo ocupación, publicado en el año 2000. Y básicamente es un recuento de este periodo de 3 años en los que vivió en la Franja de Gaza. También tiene otros libros, Reportando desde Ramallah, una periodista israelí en la tierra ocupada, del 2003, y el diario de Bergen-Belsen de 1944-1945, publicado en el 2009. Ella ha recibido distintos premios, incluyendo el World Press Freedom Hero Award del Instituto de la Prensa Internacional y también el World Press Freedom Prize de la UNESCO. Amira ha sido sujeto de mucho correo de odio, precisamente por su posición como corresponsal. También se ha pedido que se le persiga legalmente. Se le acusa de incitar a la violencia, ya que ella ha escrito defendiendo precisamente que los palestinos puedan aventar piedras, que puedan defenderse de los soldados israelíes. Ella ha argumentado que aventar piedras, es el derecho de nacimiento y el deber de cualquiera que esté bajo ocupación extranjera. Y ha sugerido que las escuelas palestinas deberían de ofrecer clases básicas en resistencia, distintas formas de resistencia y además cuáles son sus reglas y limitaciones. Este tipo de posturas es lo que ha generado que personas desde Israel más conservadoras la ataquen o vean su postura pro-palestina como una amenaza. Y bueno, su opinión ha traído también reacciones en internet de otros comentaristas de los medios de comunicación. Y vamos a tener entonces ahora la participación de Amira a través de un audio. Nuevamente les recuerdo, la presentación es en inglés para que pongan atención y damos inicio entonces a su participación.
Hello. I hear you. Do you hear me?
Of course, we hear you very well.
Do you hear me?
Of course, we hear you very well. If you can start with your presentation, Amira, thank you very much for joining us in this conference. Go for it.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. It is awkward to participate without hearing the other speakers. So excuse me for repetitions or for what might seem detours or neglection. I would like to make 3 comments here. First one, it is common to say that history is written by the victorious. And I should say that Palestinians show that this should not be automatically the case. Your conference is a proof to that. History is being discussed here at your conference from a starting and a breaking point whose global significance and context were always very clear for the Palestinians, very valid and relevant and an open sore. This is the settler colonialism as a European project where the colonized and Palestinians among them were seen as superfluous and unaccounted for subjects. For the victorious, this point, the Balfour Declaration, was a positive moment in a logical linear sequence from the time of the patriarch Abraham. More and more, in spite of this, more and more now the Balfour Declaration is discussed as a negative moment in history, in spite of the way Israelis see it. In fact, Palestinians, indigenous people, feminists, Afro-Americans, and many other groups have proven over the past decades that history is written more and more by groups which had been defeated. The fact, or temporarily defeated, the fact that these groups are being heard now in loud voices after decades or centuries that they were not, is part of their struggle for rights and resurgence and agency, and a result of this struggle. All these groups tell us that history is of those who have been wronged, marginalized, silenced in the past. Now they make the others learn this history, if not learn from it. Now to my second comment. The Balfour Declaration places its initiators and beneficiaries, England and the Zionist movement, within the general context of European colonialism and settler colonialism. The characters of Zionism as a settler colonial movement that replaces one people in its homeland, from its homeland, by another, and by political structures that benefit only one group, these characteristics are self-evident and have been unfolded over the past 100 years. But Zionism was also born out of another European context, which is complementary to that context of colonialism. That is nationalism and its companions, racism and in particular anti-Semitism. Zionism proposed a solution, as it saw it, for the problem of persecution and discrimination against the Jews where they lived in Europe, especially Eastern Europe. In 1917, the Zionist solution attracted only a minority among the Jews in Europe. Actually, the majority of them opted for many other solutions, especially emigration, especially to the US, but also to South America and Western Europe and other countries. Other people, other Jews in Europe thought that assimilation would save them, or that maintaining religious autonomy or cultural autonomy, like the Bund party in Poland, which was the strongest party among Jews there in Poland. Others thought that joining socialist and communist movements to change the reality in their respective countries would save them from, would save everybody from racism and from oppression. They were proven wrong. So, in short, the majority of Jews did not question their belonging to the diaspora, to a non-state-like form of existence. At a certain point, this diaspora made it clear that the Jews were not wanted at all. First, not geographically, then not even among the living. We may ask if the United States had not placed new quotas and restrictions on immigration in 1924 that stopped the influx of Jews who chose to live there. Who knows how many Jews from Germany and Nazified Europe would have fled on time, saved their life, and not emigrated to Palestine. Tragically, Zionism became popular among Jews in the 1930s and more so in the 1940s. After the Second World War, when survivors returned to their liberated countries in Europe, they discovered again how unwelcome they were. This was true in Eastern Europe, but also in some Western countries like Holland. Nazi brainwashing worked, and Jews were seen more than before as aliens who should not stay in those countries. Therefore, many of those who survived Nazism, that is, the few who did survive Nazism in Europe, chose to immigrate to Palestine as refugees. And tragically, they became colonizers and refuse till today to acknowledge it. It is a legitimate question. Could Zionism have succeeded? Could Zionism as a colonialist movement, as a settler colonial movement, could it have succeeded without the great influx of people who felt refugees and then came to Palestine? Without Western guilt and without the money that Germany paid as compensations? It is a question. The background of Auschwitz does not exempt us, Israelis, from responsibility to banishing the Palestinians from their land and for replacing them. But the complexity should be understood when we think of the future. Now the future or the present as a third comment. Ridiculously, I would say, it is Israel itself that obliterates the complexity. Israeli mainstream historians and other writers do not acknowledge, they refuse to acknowledge the colonialist characteristics of the state. But in the past 25 years, Israel has done everything possible to confirm that it is driven by colonialist goals, methods, and spirit. For the sake of the future of both peoples, Palestinians agreed in the late 80s and early 90s to have a painful compromise. They agreed to have a state, 22% of their homeland, because they acknowledge the existence of an Israeli society that cannot and will not be removed. There is no final phase in history. History keeps changing. The two-state solution should have been a corridor to another stage for the benefit of the two peoples, only if it were based on good intentions. Palestinians expected Israel to stop the colonization of their remaining land. But instead of that, instead of accepting the generous present of the Palestinians, given them in the form of the Oslo Agreement, Israel just continued to colonize, to the point where Palestinians are now pushed to living in separated, congested enclaves that can be disconnected from each other at any moment. Under the guise of a peace process, Israel did everything possible to sabotage the possibility of a Palestinian state, and actually to confirm that it is mainly and first of all a colonialist state. And this is the reality with which we have to deal with today.
Amira, thank you very much for your remarks. I will ask you kindly that if you can wait for the questions of the audience. If somebody wants to ask you something, I will pick up some questions for you, okay?
Sure.
¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta que quiera hacer allá? Arriba.
Let's see if you can hear our speaker. If you don't hear her, she can come to the panel.
Okay.
Oh, okay. ¿Tiene que ser en inglés o en español? Okay, perfecto. Okay, hi, how are you? No, that's not the question. I just want to be polite.
Yeah, it's foggy, but yes, all right, we'll try.
Okay. Well, the thing is that it's very all you said is really interesting because you said that the Israeli people are not respecting the frontiers in Palestine. So do you think?
Some of the words have been, I didn't catch some of the words, I'm sorry.
Bueno, la cuestión está en que si ella cree que una de la raíz principal podría ser el conflicto religioso entre la religión árabe, bueno, el Islam, y la religión judía, y aparte de eso, ¿qué repercusiones tiene el hecho de que algunos judíos, lo que dijo ella, hayan emigrado desde Europa hacia Israel, o bien que hayan emigrado a otras partes del mundo, como en Estados Unidos o Sudamérica o cuestiones así?
Hoy, Marcel Álvarez will translate the question, Amira.
Sure.
Hi. Okay, so she wants to know which is a place that the religious conflict is playing on this, what impact it has currently on the situation, and also what you said about the Jewish immigrants going to Palestine instead of going to other places like North America. What you said about this immigration, what is the impact that it has on the current problem?
Let me start with the second question, because maybe it was not clear. What I meant that in the 40s, in the 30s, in the 40s, in the 50s, or actually in the 30s, when it was not possible anymore for Jews from Europe to flee to other countries, to flee from Europe, and to flee from the danger to their life, and save themselves in other countries, the place of Palestine as a refuge became stronger for them. And this remained, this impression of Palestine or of a Jewish nation state became, the impression became much more stronger afterwards. That's the thing. So the impact today is that, I mean, this history, it is history, but it exists in the conscious of people. But this, at that time, it was a historical fact that Jews were not accepted in other countries. So they looked for a place to be accepted or to be able to go to. This should not be forgotten. And I mean, the responsibility here, of course, is the responsibility of all those countries that refuse to have Jews and refuse to have Jewish refugees, also from the time of, from before the end of the Second World War. Now, religion, in a way, you know, the fact that Palestinians accept the presence of Jews in the country can be attributed to religion. As a friend of mine from Gaza, he's quite religious, Muslim. Of course, he's not Hamas, but he's quite religious. He said that anybody, any Muslim, real Muslim, that's what he says. For any Muslim, the place of Jews in this country, in Palestine, is very natural. Anybody who reads and anybody who thinks about this, the history of the three monotheistic religions, accept the presence of Jews here, but as part of a people, of a land, not as colonizers, not as occupiers. So this is the positive place. But with time, religion has been utilized in order to intensify a conflict which is not religious in origin. it is a conflict between colonizer and colonized, and occupied, and out of this complexity of one group of refugees which came and became colonizers and a group of colonized. So religion is part of the ways that is now being used to intensify or to fortify both parties. Jews are using it to say that this place was promised to us by God, and Palestinians say that they come out of the Quran, taking the necessary sentences to prove that that God is promised this land for them, etc. This is the negative part of religion now being used. But again, it is not a question. Religion could have been a bridge here, much more than, as much as it is now a weapon. But it could have been also a way to neutralize the dangers of colonialism. But it is not.
Ok, vamos a tomar dos preguntas más para que se las traduzca yo a Amira. ¿Alguien más tiene alguna pregunta? Allá arriba.
Buenos días. Mi pregunta es ¿por qué la profesora o la experta cree que aún no están tan reconocidas generalmente por la academia, por la comunidad internacional, las características de colonia de esos estados? Bueno, en este caso de Palestina.
Okay, muchas gracias. ¿Alguien más? Voy a hacer la pregunta y Daniel, tú le puedes preguntar directamente.
Oh, aquí.
Okay, so I want to know why you think it is that the international community and academics in general don't recognize this colonial reality of the territory.
Maybe we should ask the other question and I will answer.
¿Quieres que le haga Marce para no acercarme? I don't know if you're hearing me, Amira, but if not, Marce will ask for me. I have just a brief question regarding the current facts on the ground in the Israel-Palestine scenario. So, in your own perspective, as a journalist, as a people who had lived inside the occupied territories and had been collaborated with Jewish and Palestinian medias, which is your own perspective for the two-state solution right now? Because we are facing several opinions in the academia or with politicians or activists or civil society that claim that the two-state solution is dead or almost dead. For you, which is your perspective regarding this notion, please?
I know the direction, but please repeat it.
He wants to know, as a journalist that has been living in the occupied territories, what is your perspective on the two-state solution and everything that is going on now with the local media and these ideas that they are having? As you have been collaborating with other media on the ground, what is your personal perspective on this?
On the two-state solution?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the first question, why doesn't the international community recognize or acknowledge this colonial reality? Well, actually, I'm not sure it doesn't, but maybe we live in an era where colonialism is not such a bad word as it used to be after the 1950s. Maybe it is not, this is one answer, that it is not seen as so negative, or it's seen as part of history that that is, can be digested. This is one answer. Another possible answer is that Zionist colonialism is anachronistic, because true, it started to grow in the context of late European colonialism, but it reached its goal of a state and of banishing the Palestinians and having a state instead of the Palestinians. It reached its late when in all other parts of the world there was a process of decolonization. So for a very long time, the Israeli experiment of colonialism was seen as something different. As I said before, it was in part something different because of the Second World War, or it had some other aspects. But now again, we see this colonialism in as I said, in a very full form. And because it is unique now, other places also, other colonized places in the world, some of the impacts of colonialism or post-colonialism till today. You can see that, for example, I was in Australia. In Australia, where there are still ways to marginalize the remaining indigenous people. The same is true maybe in Canada, or you would know better about Mexico. But here, where the colonialist entity is so, I will go back to the first part of my answer, is that it is not seen as the main issue, or it is difficult to acknowledge that this is the main character of Israel. It is because this will enforce, let's say, states and societies that would like to see the state of Israel existing. This will oblige to the views. I don't know. So this is, I'm contemplating out. Now, as for the second question, look, the two states, or I feel that sometimes we spend too much time on imagining the future in such details. Two states, one state. Usually when I'm asked if I'm for the one-state solution or for the two-state solution, I answer mockingly, I would say, but also somewhat seriously, that if to think about the far future or about a vision, then as a socialist, my vision is, for example, the United Socialist States of the Middle East. Why not? So, but this is a joke. Don't think that I can prove myself that now this is possible. The two-state solution meant at the 70s, when it started to have some more adherence among Jews and Palestinians, was at the background of two societies that did not acknowledge the existence of the other as a people, the Israeli Jews and the Palestinians. And the idea of two states would address this problem. Later on, even though the two-state solution would never be based on complete, it is not possible to undo history, to go back to 45 or 43 or 39 in Palestine, but it would put the vision of the principle of equality between the peoples as a basic. I think that these principles remain that there are two peoples in this country. It is hard, sometimes very hard for Palestinians to acknowledge that the Israeli Jews are forming a people, not just a religious group or a religious minority. So there are two peoples here, and the peoples have rights, and even at a certain moment, even peoples which were formed by colonization and become peoples, like in Mexico. So they do have rights, but it doesn't mean that these rights should be at the expense of others and at the expense of the natives and the original people of the land. So then comes the principle of equality. How we translate these three fundamentals, how do we translate it to the future? At time it seemed that two states would be a reasonable phase, historical phase. And as I said before, no phase in history is final. No phase in history is terminal. There is a phase which leads to another one. What worries me about talks that the two-state solution is not possible anymore, what worries me is the axiom that some people put it as an axiom, that the situation now is irreversible, that the settlements are irreversible. And this is something that I refuse to accept. I even see this statement as racist. Because what does it mean when we say that the settlements are irreversible? That we should not touch the Jews. Every settlement, every moment means now harassment of Palestinians, taking land of Palestinians, taking more land of Palestinians, taking their water, placing army to persecute the Palestinians. Any moment while we are talking, something like this is going on. So if we say that the settlements are irreversible, actually we allow them to continue. We allow them to continue as such. We legitimize them from now. Because when we say that settlements are irreversible, we don't talk about a certain phase when they are benign entities. No, we are talking about a process of permanent harassment and banishment of Palestinians. So this is something that I would like to exclude from the talk about solution, one state or two states. We should return to the very, very basic fundamental in international law. The settlements, all the settlements are illegal. They are against international law. They are illegal. And we should, I think, stick to this basic, because it is a tool. It is a very important tool for all of us when we talk about the future.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We are very grateful for your participation in our international conference. And I'm happy to meet you guys very soon in Mexico next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bueno, a continuación tenemos a la doctora Abeer Musleh. Tenemos un poquito de problemas con esta conexión, entonces, bueno, estamos haciendo todo lo posible porque se escuche lo mejor. La doctora Musleh es profesora asistente de política social en el Departamento de Ciencias Sociales en la Universidad de Belén y está dedicada al pueblo palestino y la comunidad palestina en la diáspora en Líbano y Siria. En 1995 inició su licenciatura en la Universidad de Belén en el Departamento de Ciencias Sociales y también se unió al Departamento de Jóvenes Voluntarios de la Sociedad del Creciente Rojo Palestino. Más adelante inició su programa de maestría en Género, Derecho y Desarrollo en la Universidad Birzeit y también ha trabajado en el Instituto Tamer para Educación Comunitaria en Ramallah. En 2004 se unió a UNICEF como oficial nacional sobre política e intervenciones a nivel nacional y en 2006 inició el programa de estudios de posgrado avanzados en la Escuela Heller de Política Social y Administración en la Universidad de Belén. En 2011 se unió al Departamento de Ciencias Sociales de la misma universidad y ha estado involucrada en desarrollar la maestría de trabajo social. Su investigación se enfoca en el desarrollo juvenil en Palestina y en el mundo árabe, con un énfasis particular en el impacto que las organizaciones juveniles tienen sobre la cultura juvenil, el involucramiento de los jóvenes, su estatus y modelos de liderazgo. Publicó el papel de las organizaciones en la socialización de los líderes jóvenes en los territorios palestinos ocupados después de Oslo en la revista de Estudios Internacionales Mediterráneos, así como la emergencia y desarrollo de la rama de involucramiento juvenil y desarrollo en los territorios ocupados palestinos a través de 3 eras históricas. Este último está enfocado en cómo se ha dado un cambio pues en la rama institucional de este involucramiento juvenil en los territorios ocupados y el impacto que ha tenido en las organizaciones emergentes, en los modelos en los que estas organizaciones trabajan y también en la posición de los jóvenes. Actualmente su investigación gira en torno a un proyecto de metodología mixta sobre estas iniciativas dirigidas por jóvenes en Jerusalén con el objetivo de pues completar la literatura que existe al respecto de los jóvenes en el mundo árabe, ya que ella nota que esta literatura es principalmente descriptiva y pues ve a los jóvenes de una forma deficiente. ¿En qué sentido? Ella dice que pues no solamente se trata de importar conocimiento desde afuera y adaptarlo a su propio contexto, sino que lo que urgentemente se necesita es que ellos se conviertan en productores de conocimiento sustancial, transformador, que permita ampliar esta área. Y dice que esta es la única forma en la que pueden hacer una diferencia, no nada más en Palestina y en el mundo. Creo que esto va muy en línea con lo que se mencionaba ayer, precisamente de cómo desde el sur global tenemos que empezar a producir conocimiento para el propio sur global que nos permita describir estos fenómenos pues desde una perspectiva local y no nada más estar importando el conocimiento que viene desde afuera. Entonces, el doctor Moisés va a hacer la conexión y nuevamente va a hacer la presentación en inglés.
Abeer Yamila Musleh, WhatsApp EP de audio.
We
سامع؟
can hear you. You can start your Abeer.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? I see it's connected. I can. Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? I don't know what happened. Oh, okay, you can hear me. I cannot. So do you want me? So shall I just start? Okay. So first, I would like to start by thank you for inviting me to be a speaker in session. It is a great opportunity to be part of this conference, even though it's a virtual participation. But a virtual participation, I think it's definitely worth it, especially with the conversation that takes place between South countries, and with the importance or solidarity of the people in Mexico and other countries with Palestine. I would like to start. So it's a little bit confusing, sorry for me, it's a little bit confusing because we're trying to figure out what's going on your side and if you're hearing me or not. So I'm sorry for that. It's weird. But I would like to start today by tackling certain specific issues with regard to the status of youth engagement mainly. Balfour Declaration, which is unfortunately this year. So if we think about the Balfour Declaration, it was actually a connection between between two colonizing powers, and in that sense, the Zionist movement was started toward in the 19th century, and it was a way of colonizing, which was aiming to establish a state for the Jews, mainly European Jews, on the land of Palestine, and didn't take into any consideration or the aspiration of the Palestinian people, and considered that this land that had the slogan of a land with no people for people with no land. With that matched with the colonization that was starting from the Western country, and at that time it was European mainly versus various European countries trying to conquer the old man, which was the Ottoman Empire, and accordingly divided it and control that part of the world. What does it mean to have a Balfour Declaration? What does it mean to declare an establishment of a homeland for another people in someone's land? With that, we can see the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians started. The debate about eventually the Palestinian people to be displaced in various countries of the world, also to cease to exist and continue their development as any regular people on their land. If we want to think about the young people these days, we can't see it separately from the result of that aspects. Young people are a result of the context in which they live. Their engagement, their worldview, their identities are a result of such context.
Vamos a tratar una vez más de entablar conexión y vamos a esperar a que ella nos llame porque fue así la forma en la que pudimos hacer contacto con ella. Vamos a esperar un minutito, por favor.
Abeer Yamila Musleh, WhatsApp pp.
Can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you.
Hello? Hello?
Bueno, al parecer, como ustedes pueden ver, hay algún problema ahí en la conexión. Esto no nos había pasado. Ella dijo que probablemente hay alguien que no quiere que esto pase. En fin, vamos a probar, sí, vamos a probar con Noura. Vamos a ver si está conectada y si no, vamos a dar inicio a la conferencia magistral del doctor Dabashi, ¿de acuerdo? Vamos a intentar solamente una vez con Noura Erakat. Y bueno, puedes presentarla, Marcela. En caso de que ella conteste, bueno, Marcela va a hacer una presentación y si no, le vamos a pedir que nos mande su presentación escrita en caso de que no conteste.
Muy bien. Noura Erakat es activista, abogada de derechos humanos y profesora asistente de la Universidad George Mason, en donde enseña en las áreas de Derecho, Medio Oriente, Derecho Internacional y Derechos Humanos, así como Justicia Social. Sus intereses incluyen Derecho Humanitario, Derecho de Refugiados, Derechos Humanos y también cuestiones legales vinculadas a seguridad nacional. Obtuvo su licenciatura de la Escuela de Leyes de Berkeley y su maestría en Seguridad Nacional del Centro de Leyes de la Universidad de Georgetown. Es fundadora y editora de Jadaliyya, específicamente su página sobre ocupación, intervención y derecho, y también funge como miembro de la Junta del Instituto de Investigaciones Transárabes. Noura ha aparecido en NBC, MSNBC y Al Jazeera, y también es consultora legal en Estados Unidos para el Centro de Recursos Badil para derechos de refugiados y de residencia de palestinos en Estados Unidos. Noura ha trabajado como organizadora de movimientos de sociedad civil, ha sido abogada y consultora legal en una campaña de Estados Unidos para terminar con la ocupación israelí. Ha ayudado también a sembrar la semilla precisamente de la campaña BDS, el movimiento BDS, que pues también ya tenemos actualmente miembros en México, y ha ayudado a apoyar casos en contra de dos oficiales israelíes que fueron acusados, enjuiciados en cortes federales en Estados Unidos por crímenes de guerra. Ella también ayudó a iniciar este movimiento BDS junto con estudiantes por la justicia de Palestina en la Universidad de Berkeley y a desarrollar litigios, una unidad de litigios enfocada en poder ayudar a que pasen reclamos de derechos humanos de los palestinos. Entre sus publicaciones tenemos Arabilla, Hecho Invisible. Y bueno, vamos entonces a tener ya su participación, que me parece que será muy breve, pero bueno, escuchamos entonces a Noura Erakat.
Go ahead, Noura. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello to everybody, and thank you for your congregation and your spirit, your energy, and for having me with you in this moment. I just want to share how important it is for us as Palestinians to have the work that you are putting into the labor and the support, because the question of Palestine has become one that has been hijacked by the international community. It's been hijacked by a humanitarian industry. It's been hijacked by a peace process industry. It's been hijacked by industries that fulfill state prerogatives and expedient needs, but that don't respond to the situation on the ground. And the only way to overcome this intransigence, which has now become entrenched after 100 years since Balfour, is the work and the solidarity of a grassroots movement that has said we will rise up where our governments have failed. Our responsibility to Palestine isn't a responsibility to the Palestinian people, or to Jews in the world who are also seeking peace. It is a responsibility to humanity of our commitment to overcome a settler colonial condition. It is our commitment to overcome racism, our commitment to overcome anti-Black racism. Through those commitments, not only in Palestine, but also in our own homes, to the commitments in Mexico on behalf of indigenous communities who are fighting for their national rights, for control over natural resources, gas, petroleum, trees, and so forth. It's the same condition that when you fight at home for those rights, you are fighting for Palestinians to be free. When you are fighting against anti-Black racism and the dehumanization of a people and the condition of their social death, even while alive, you are fighting on behalf of the Palestinian people as well. The question of Palestine emerges as a question of settler colonialism that is in contravention to all principles of law, of international law, of human rights law, of laws of war. And yet, because of power politics that are implicated in this international conflict, what you have is the suspension of law and the creation of exceptions for the powerful that establish new law in order to legitimate and to justify the 10 decades of deprivation, of dispossession, of removal, of forced exile, of destruction, of the tearing apart of family fabrics, of the denial of the Palestinian people's own peoplehood and existence as a nation, and not just as a motley crew of Arab Bedouins from around the Middle East. It has been this exception and the work of power and the work of violence that has created the condition that we continue to witness today, which is actually, despite the exception, par for the course on all questions of settler colonialism. Palestine is no exception to other conditions of settler colonialism. in North America, in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in Hawaii, that what in South Africa, that these conditions that Palestinians face have been faced and are continuing to be faced by other indigenous communities and native communities against the removal and against the racialized violence, regimes of racialized violence that are embedded into legal systems that perpetuate them and make them possible and legitimate them globally. And so I thank you again for your congregation and solidarity, and want to emphasize just again that we are in a chapter of we're in the Palestinian struggle where the states and governments have failed us and have actually become a deeply imbricated part of the problem. Even the Palestinian government has become a deeply imbricated part of the problem and no longer part of the solution. And so it is you, all of you in that room, in that commitment and knowledge production and protest and solidarity movement and a movement of revolutionary and radical love and resistance that is planting the seeds for the next chapter and the next horizon for Palestinian liberation, but also for all of humanity, the lessons that we learn and how it is that we can actually create new models of living with one another and do what Europe has not been able to do, and build on what Frantz Fanon advises us when he says that if we wanted just to establish states, then we should have let European colonizers do that for us because they've done it better than us. But if we want to create a system that is better than what Europe has been able to offer, then let that be our contribution. And so I believe very firmly and applaud you all for being in the movement to make that contribution and to offer to the world what Europe has failed to offer, which is a humanity that has room for all of us. So thank you again very much. Thank you very much, and thank you for your organizing. Thank you, thank you.
Ok, bueno, dadas las dificultades técnicas que experimentamos, vamos a dar por concluido este seminario online, pero les pedimos por favor que no se vayan. Vamos a iniciar entonces un poquito antes con la conferencia del doctor Dabashi. Solamente vamos a arreglar aquí, a cambiar un poco el panel. Vamos a tomarnos unos minutos, entonces por favor ténganos un par de minutos de paciencia y seguimos con la siguiente conferencia.
Innovación que estoy tratando de hacer, pues, tratando de que haya gente, ¿no?, de otros lados, pero creo que luego las dificultades técnicas son difíciles.
¿Sabes qué siento? Que aquí en el auditorio, internet,
con todos los que están conectados, ¿no?
Pues a lo mejor
El centro, por así decirlo. Tú lo vas a presentar, mi Marce, y luego ya yo hago unos pequeños comentarios y ya.
¿Qué dices, Moy? Tú me dices cuando ya... que tomes, ¿ya? Bueno, muchas gracias a todos por esperar. Vamos a dar inicio entonces a la conferencia del doctor Hamid Dabashi, la idea de la intifada global. El doctor Hamid Dabashi nació en 1951 en la ciudad de Ahvaz, en la provincia iraní de Juzestán, y recibió su educación superior en la ciudad de Teherán para posteriormente mudarse a los Estados Unidos de América, en donde recibiría su doctorado tanto en sociología de la cultura como en estudios islámicos por parte de la Universidad de Pensilvania. Posteriormente realizaría estudios postdoctorales en la Universidad de Harvard, en donde realizó una tesis doctoral sobre la autoridad carismática de Max Weber. El doctor Dabashi cuenta con el nombramiento de profesor Hagop Kevorkian de estudios iraníes y de literatura comparativa en la Universidad de Columbia en Nueva York, en donde actualmente imparte clases. Ha enseñado y ofrecido una diversidad de clases y conferencias en diferentes universidades norteamericanas, sudamericanas, árabes, europeas e iraníes. Es miembro fundador del Instituto de Literatura Comparativa y Sociedad, así como del Centro de Estudios Palestinos dentro de la Universidad de Columbia. Ha escrito 25 libros, editado 4 y contribuido en la elaboración de otros textos. Es autor de alrededor de 100 ensayos, artículos y reseñas bibliográficas, así como ha sido dictaminador en diversas revistas de divulgación en sus temas de especialidad como estudios iraníes, Islam moderno y medieval, literatura comparativa, cinematografía mundial, arte y filosofía. El profesor Dabashi, además de ser un reconocido autor de carácter crítico, ganador de múltiples reconocimientos, tiene un gran compromiso con dar a conocer la causa palestina por medio del cine a través de Palestinian Film Project, del cual es miembro fundador. Es un intelectual orgánico comprometido con el activismo en contra de la guerra en el mundo. Actualmente vive en Nueva York, en donde comparte su vida con su esposa Golbar Bashi, su hija Chelgis y su hijo Golchin, que afortunadamente nos acompañaron también estos días, aquí están con nosotros. Y bueno, nuevamente tenemos el honor y el placer de tenerlo aquí acompañándonos para impartirnos sus conocimientos. Así que sin más, pues le cedo la palabra al doctor Dabashi.
Thank you, Marcella. I didn't understand a word of what you said, but I trust what you said was good. I'm grateful to UNAM. Every single word of UNAM, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, is very, very precious. And the task of protecting the precious words, National Autonomous University Mexico, is with your generation. These spaces that we have, these spaces of being able freely to think critically about the fate of the world, not just the Palestinian world, but the entirety of the world. Today, these days are at the mercy of the autonomy of this space in which we have gathered. Every occasion that I have, I must express my gratitude to the will of Mexican people. This is not the magnificence of some president, of some parliament, or some politician that we are here. We are here by virtue of the generosity, the catholicity of learning of, and the history and culture of Mexican people, for whose hospitality I'm very grateful. Representative of all of that is, of course, my dear friend Musa, who, like Prophet Musa, just leads us through the Red Sea of troubles. Musa is dear friend, is beyond being colleague and comrade and all of that. And for continuing to invite me to come here to be with you, I'm very grateful to you, Musa. I was absolutely delighted to be here with that, celebrating the extraordinary achievements of Luis Mesa, my dear friend and colleague, who is a pillar of establishment of the kinds of studies that we are all part of it. This is just the beginning of Luis Mesa's contribution. And long live magnificent productivity, even longer than Fidel. I have many dear friends, Jaime, Ale, etc. I will not waste time on that. I simply want to express my pleasure and honor to be in the same company as my dear friend, colleague, and comrade, Ilan Pape, and his absolutely extraordinary scholarship of the last 3-4 decades, on the basis of which the rest of us work. Is a pleasure, Ilan, to be always on a panel with you. As I always tell to Ilan, we see each other in Mexico, in Doha, and the test of our time is when Ilan and I co-teach a course in University of Jerusalem, inshallah, soon. Now, my talk today, the question of global intifada, is a political question that I wish to address. But I wish to address the political question in a moral context. The moral context is, what does it mean for us to gather here in Mexico to reflect critically on the question of Palestine? What does it mean to express solidarity with Palestine? We just heard our colleague Noura Erakat talking about the question of solidarity, talking about the universalities of issues, which is true. But we need to ask the fundamental question of what precisely it means for us, beautiful day like this, take a few hours out, come here, not just to reflect about the political, cultural, historical context, but also to express our solidarity with the Palestinian cause. What does it exactly mean? There are those who tell you that expression of solidarity with the Palestinian cause is hostility towards Israel. Even worse, is a sign of anti-Semitism. So if we say, don't drop bomb on Palestinians in Gaza, don't destroy their homes, don't uproot their olive trees, just don't do it. If somebody is uprooting a tree right here on Unam, I would go and say, please don't do it. But I wouldn't be accused of anything other than, being a nosy environmentalist. I love trees. But the political context in which the Palestinian cause is expressed is fraught with issues. Anti-Semitism is not an easy accusation. Jews historically have been subject of hatred, historically. The other of Europe, from the time immemorial. It is actually written into the very fabric of European Christianity, not Latin American Christianity. There is nothing in liberation theology that has anything to do with anti-Semitism. It's a particular take of Christianity, which, at least since Bartolomé de las Casas, is written into colonialism. When in 16th century, Bartolomé de las Casas is writing a short account of the destruction of the Indies. That's a turning point in which European Christianity becomes at the service of European colonialism. Some consider him the father of liberation theology, Christian liberation theology. Perhaps there is an argument to be made. But if you read him carefully, the documentation, this voyeurism of what these Spaniards were doing with Native Americans is actually a transformation of Christianity from a medieval to a capitalist modality. So one cannot take the accusation of anti-Semitism, hatred of the Jews, or anything of that sort lightly. A whole history of pogroms, of hatred of Jews, culminating in the horrors of 6 million plus Jews murdered in Nazi Europe, is, in their word, anti-Semitism. And we cannot take it serious. So the task of continuously making the point that if you are from pro-BDS, you are not anti-Semites, and the obscenity of mobilizing the entirety of the US Congress for a kid, an activist who is thinking of a peaceful process of BDS to oppose occupation, that he's to be opposed, when in the streets of Charlottesville, the most disgusting anti-Semitic slogans are being aired. And Netanyahu doesn't utter a word against that. Why? What is this link between anti-Semitism and Zionism, which of course Elon talked about it. But if we are not to fall into that trap, if we are in fact to consider the dead end of charge of anti-Semitism, I always say the only people who are afraid of being called anti-Semites are anti-Semites. If you're not anti-Semites, you're not afraid of being called anti-Semites. Not all Jews are Zionists, not all Zionists are Jews. That's the end of conversation. There are plenty Muslim Zionists, Christian Zionists, atheist Zionists. For all now, there are some Mexican Zionists, for all I know. So, and not all Jews are Zionists. That's the end of the conversation. So there is nothing to be said. But that is by omission. What about by commission? What does it mean to be pro-Palestinian? Or if there is the sort of the moral apparatus of somebody from Norway, somebody from Morocco, somebody from Mexico express solidarity with the Palestinians, well, agency is with that person. What about Palestinians? Are the Palestinians only sitting there passively at as the recipient of the generosity of the world's political commitments to the Palestinian cause? What do Palestinians give back in exchange? What is the dynamic of reciprocity between the Palestinian cause and those who express solidarity with the Palestinian cause? Our dear friend, distinguished colleague, eminent linguist, and role model of all of us, for any time we have stood for the right, Noam Chomsky has every right to be against BDS, that's his right. But recently he said that he is against BDS because he doesn't want to give Palestinians false hope. Imagine the chutzpah, as we say in Brooklyn, of that. Are Palestinians sitting there waiting, checking their emails? What does Chomsky think of our resistance? Or anybody, Dabashi, Pape, whoever. That is not the way national liberation movement work. That, oh, I don't want to give them false hope. Who the hell are you? Who the hell is anybody to give, who the hell is even a Palestinian? Mahmoud Abbas, anybody, Edward Said, Azmi Bishara, any one individual. This is misplaced concreteness on what it is that we are doing. A national liberation movement has its own logic, has its own collective consciousness. And the generation of critical question of BDS needs to be critically discussed, but not with the assumption that I don't want to give them false hope. Palestinians, first of all, as you know, have their own voices. Edward Said, Azmi Bishara, you name it. They have artists, filmmakers, intellectuals, journalists, and they speak for themselves. But the root of everything, art, literature, is the collective will of the Palestinians themselves. Not intellectuals, not professors, not journalists, not artists. The root from which, the ground from which all of this emerges is the collective consciousness of a people for now about 100 years resisting domination in any way available to them. Some of which ways we may approve individually, some of which we may not approve. But when the gun is put to somebody's mind, you don't give them, oh, don't do this, don't do the other thing. Now, the question of global intifada, first of all, we have to know what the hell is intifada. It's an Arabic word. We should say it. It's good for your throat. And it simply means uprising, intifada, uprising. Historically, we identify it with two specific dates in Palestinian uprisings. 1987, the first intifada, and 2000, the second, or Al-Aqsa intifada. What it simply means is a moment in the absence of alternatives, Palestinian people themselves begin to resist domination. And it is not by just throwing a stone. It is, for example, BDS is part of intifada. It's simply resistance to domination with limited means available to them, which may include throwing of a stone. And if it were up to Trump, he would condemn violence on both sides. The fifth most deadly military machinery on planet Earth, namely Israel, is equal to a kid throwing a stone, blaming it on both sides. Violence is violence. But it is important to keep in mind that the first time in the Arabic political culture we hear intifada is not in Palestinian context, but it's actually in Iraqi context, back in the 1950s, when in the aftermath of the Egyptian resistance to both monarchy and colonialism, the fourth intifada was used. And then, so that's 1950s, this is before the Palestinian intifada. And then more metaphorically, when the Arab revolutions began, because everybody was talking about, will there be a third intifada? I was among those who argued that in fact the Arab revolutions are a manifestation of the third intifada. But this time is not limited within the boundaries of Palestine, but it is more extended to the larger Arab world. One of our young colleagues yesterday asked about the collaboration of many regimes, Arab regimes, with Israel. States like United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or Egypt. Morsi did not launch his military coup d'etat before he checked with Israelis. And Israelis assured him through AIPAC they will make sure that the military aid to Egypt will continue despite the military coup. This is during Obama, who had the semblance of support for new liberal regimes. There is an index of Arab public opinion being published, as I told a colleague, in Doha. There is nothing, no issue is more important to Arabs across the Arab world than the question of Palestine. Ilan is correct that the question of Palestine is a global issue, but one should not dismiss the actual almost 300 million Arabs and their solidarity with the Palestinian cause and the significance of Palestinian cause for their own democratic aspirations. Because the question is not just one demon called Israel or Zionism. What the Saudis right now are doing in Yemen at the head of 11 nations, 11 country, 11 most powerful, wealthiest Arab nations right now as we speak, for almost 2 years, bombing the poorest Arab country, Yemen. What's the difference? Well, there is an epidemics right now emerging in Yemen. So it is not, if the Yemenis have aspirations, if the Egyptians have aspirations, Moroccans, etc., there is an expression of what they see, hopefully, happening with the Palestinian cause. Now, I go back to my original question. What does it mean if we were to use the question of Palestine as a metaphor? There is a wonderful conversation between late Edward Said and late Mahmoud Darwish in a documentary that BBC did called In Search of Palestine, in which Mahmoud Darwish, the national poet of Palestinians, talks about the transformation of Palestine into a metaphor. What happens when Palestinian cause becomes a metaphor? Because for Palestinians, the Palestinian question is not a metaphor, it's a gushing wound. Every single day is a gushing wound. Imagine, God forbid, you have a wound that is bleeding, somebody take a picture and write an aesthetic essay on it. Well, probably it would be a good aesthetic essay, but it has nothing to do with the gushing wound that is happening. Theoretically here, we can begin to think about the significance of metaphor, metonymy, synecdoche. Okay, those of my colleagues in comparative literature. Namely, when a metaphor becomes representation of something larger than itself. Okay? When we say in Mexico City, today Mexico City, we mean Mexico as a nation. That's an example of synecdoche. That is, a specific part represents the larger issue. So, in transformation, literary transformation, symbolic transformation of the Palestinian cause into a metaphor, we are creating a space in which Palestine becomes representative of something larger than itself. So, if the Zapatistas in Chiapas have solidarity because they see the reflection of their own struggles in the Palestinian cause as a larger frame. Here, we begin to think about the nature of metaphor and allegory. And as soon as I say allegory, we have to think of the extraordinarily enabling work of the last prophet of Jewish tradition, Walter Benjamin, and his work on allegory. For Walter Benjamin, allegory, and in which context I want to read Palestine as a metaphor for global intifada. Allegory are always fragments, they're not total. The only people who have claimed to total archives are fascists. Zionism is very sure of what has happened in history. Whereas when you want to make a case for the Palestinian nationhood, you have to go specifically through as Ilan did yesterday. You have to go through a specific and put fragments together in order to make a case. But because it's truthful, you can always point finger at it and question it and debate it. Whereas the fascistic narrative is always total. There is no debate, there is no discussion, there is no back and forth. This is the nature of the allegory, as Benjamin has taught us. Now, I want to draw your attention to this picture behind me. I'm sure most of you know it. If you don't know it, that's a character. His name is Handala. Okay? Handalh. How many of you don't know who is Handala? Good. You see? All this money you spend bringing me here, I can explain Handala. Handala is a cartoon character created by a prominent Palestinian cartoonist whose name is Naji Al-Ali, who was born and raised in a refugee camp. And he was assassinated in London in the 1980s. This character, this Handala, is his creation. Okay? Now, what is particular about Handala? First and foremost, as you see him here, his back is towards us. He cannot stand looking at us. His name literally means the bitter one. The bitter one, the bitter. He's a Palestinian peasant boy. He has, patches on his thing. He's a poor boy or girl. He's genderless. We don't know. All he does, he has his hands behind him like this, and he stares at the event. That's all he does, staring at the event. We never see his expression. We don't know how he feels. Is he angry? Is he frustrated? Is he what? We don't know. He just looks. He's a witness, shahid. In Arabic, shahid, witness, shahid, martyr, for the same trilateral root. He's a shahid. He always sees. Now, this, you may say Handala is a precursor of Ilan Pape. Why? Because he's a witness to history. in a context that amnesia, historical amnesia, is the systematic definition of, 100 years, or you historians, whatever happened, Balfour, Schmalfour, forget about it, whatever. Whereas it is the responsibility, not just the Palestinians, everybody. I mean, we just spent a day in your magnificent museum of, I don't like the word anthropology, but anthropology museum. But what is it other than reconstruction of the history? Second floor and the first floor, we went at a reconstruction of history that restores identity, pride of place of who you are. So it's not just a question of, in my work, as my colleague said, is the documentation of Palestinian cinema. Imagine me chasing after pictures of Palestinian bourgeoisie, putting décolleté on and going and seeing movies in Haifa. Because we want to document the fact that there was a life, there was urbanity, there was bourgeoisie. Some of our best friends are from the bourgeoisie. But the life existed, so historicization is not that with everything that you agree, but that there was a life in there. So the task of Handala is staring at reality with his back towards us and documentation of truth. Now, the key thing about Handala is that after the assassination of Najil Ali, he continues to live in the active imagination, collective imagination, conscience collective, as Durkheim would call it, of Palestinians. So in 2003, for example, when I went through, I showed films to Palestinians in camps, say in Sabra or Shatila, when there was a collection of garbage that was not collected in part of the Mukhayyam, part of the camp, then suddenly the figure of Handala would appear with same shape, and somebody would have written on the top of it, Hafizu Allah, Nizafat al-Mukhayyam. Look after the sanitation of the Mukhayyam. So, for example, the apartheid wall right now that is being Banksy going there, you see the picture of Handala. Now, there is something specific about Handala, and for that, I want to make a distinction between nationalism and nation. Nationalism, I propose, is a state ideology, like any other ideology. But the constitution of nation is something else. In my recent theoretical work, I consider constitution of nation as a coagulation on public sphere. When societies emerge from aristocratic imperial context and public space is generated, public sphere is generated, and the question of nation is independent of a state. I, in fact, have started in my recent work beginning to decouple nation-state. This is a colonial concoction, nation-state. Okay? Fanon was just quoted by Noura Erakat, excellent quote. But the constellation of nation-state, as if every nation has a state and every state needs a nation, is predicated on a fusion. A state, this is Max Weber, this is not Fanon. A state is a monopoly of violence. That's what a state is. And then they seek legitimacy of their violence by virtue of appealing to the nation. And the nation is given certain mechanisms. Everybody is democratic. Sisi is democratic. Bashar al-Assad is democratic. Of course, Israel is the only democracy built on the broken back of the Palestinians. Or look at our constitution and look at our civil liberties and so forth. But by bifurcation of the nation and the state. Now, here I have to make a distinction. By disposition, I'm an anarchist. I see a police, I want to run away. But that has nothing to do with the theoretical observation of the decoupling of the nation and the state. Okay? Because as an anarchist, you want to dismantle the state. But this theoretical proposition is the bifurcation of our understanding of the nation and formation of nation. Palestinians are stateless. This ridiculous Palestinian Authority is not a state representing Palestinians, but they are certainly a nation. The paradox of Golda Meir's infamous statement, there were no Palestinians, everybody was a Zionist, even if there were no Palestine, by virtue of their struggles, there has to become a Palestine. The collective memory of resisting colonial domination generates the notion of the statehood. That is Palestinian. The second that Golda Meir said there are no Palestinians, she contributed in construction of Palestine. That's how nations are created. So, if we go with this bifurcation of nation and the state, let the state do and be the monopoly of violence that it is, but don't have any claim on legitimacy from any nation, because nations have a different set of operation. The question of Handala becomes crucial. And here I offer a kind of a semiotics of reading of him, that why is it and how is it that by solidarity with Palestinians, we gain as much as we give? But what we gain? Not in kind of wishy-washy, liberal, oh, if I feel good about myself, let me have a little bit of tahini and, you know, that's my part of a Palestinian. You see, years ago, I wrote a piece which borrowed from the phrase, is about sort of an argumentation with Zizek about what is the difference between Sartre and Fanon? What is the difference between Foucault and Edward Said? You see, Sartre was follower of what my late teacher Philip Reeve called Monroe Doctrine. Not famous Monroe Doctrine about Latin America, but Marilyn Monroe Doctrine. Marilyn Monroe had said, I believe in everything, a little bit. People like Sartre, they were revolutionaries. They were against all repression, a little bit. Fanon cared about Algeria and universalized Algeria. Foucault cared about everything, a little bit. Said cared about Palestine and universalized Palestine. Is the relationship between particularity and universality. All of us, wherever we live within the context of Euro-universalization. Europe has universalized itself, and the rest of us are here to see to what level we come, and this insight is entirely Gramsci's, is not mine. I wish it was mine, but it's Gramsci's. In Prison Notebook, Gramsci says, I mean, imagine this magnificent soul, hunchback, sitting in the Mussolini jail. He says he has just read Kant, Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals, in which he says, Kant says, act as if your behavior is going to be universal conduct. And Gramsci says, how can this German say this? Can I, and by I he means the Mezzogiorno, Southern Italian, kid, can I say the same thing? Can I write the same sentence? Act as if your behavior is universal conduct? Can you as a Mexican say this? I should act as if my behavior is universal conduct. To which Gramsci, the greatest revolutionary theorist of our time, all of us are kids emerging from those prison notebooks, which are like Facebook comments, today. He responds, no, I cannot, because Kant has universalized his intellect, and I have not universalized my intellect. So, when Antonio Apaya says, all of these are colleagues, that, listen, enlightenment has won. Enlightenment is universal. And then Walter Mignolo says, look at the dark side of the enlightenment. But the question is not just to look at the dark side of the enlightenment. The question is, who got to universalize her, his, and mostly they're his. Gender is very specific to this. The soul, and who did not. And how do we get to universalize our particular? By staring at the fact the reality of colonial dispossession of Palestinians. Handala is the semiotic of particular. By disallowing us to see his face, he allows us to universalize our own particular. This is the revolutionary contribution, in my opinion, of Palestinians through this innocent figure. Or why is it that if we today forfeit other reasons of gathering, going anywhere else, coming here thinking about the Palestinian cause? Yes, Palestinian cause is a noble cause and it is alive against massive conspiracies of disinformation and Hasbara things, of which Ilan spoke eloquently yesterday. That was a master class for those of you who didn't know. It's good to have that solidarity, but we need to understand the dynamic of that solidarity. Why is it that it is important for us? Why is it for us important to get to know about the Rojava or the Zapatistas or any other revolutionary momentum that dismantles the operation of the state in a way that keeps universal issues alive? That is my modest contribution to your august gathering today in the month of August. Thank you for your patience.
Agradecemos al doctor Dabashi por sus palabras y a continuación el doctor Moisés Garduño va a hacer algunos comentarios sobre la presentación.
Good morning, everyone. I will try to speak English. I'm not, I don't speak English very often, but I will try in order to have a very good and distinguished audience. So I prepared.
I would rather if you, in the case
of course.
Mexican from one gringo here.
No, distinguished audience means everyone.
Gringos.
As you know, we are almost closing our international conference in the School of Political and Social Sciences. And tomorrow we will have the last panel at the Colegio de Mexico. We will join together Luis Mesa, Ilan Pape, and Hamid Dabashi. And I hope you can join us tomorrow at 11 o'clock in the morning. The topic in that panel is what's next for Palestine. And I'm sure that reception and that panel will be very, very useful for our personal beliefs, for our contributions to social sciences, and for what we study in these kind of faculties at UNAM. So I hope to see you tomorrow at that panel. Of course, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Dabashi for his insightful talk, for accepting our invitation, because he knows very well he's a friend. He knows very well he's an inspiration, just as Pape and Luis and many other colleagues. Silvana is here with us also. And I will be very happy and honored to share one panel with him and with all of the colleagues who are in this important conference. In my little feedback to Dr. Dabashi, I just want to share one reflection about the relationship between Nakba and the global Intifada. It's very usual that we understand history of catastrophes from the common social construction of the before and the after catastrophe. You know, before 9/11 and after 9/11, before earthquake, after earthquake. And in the case of Nakba is different, and I will quote the words of Professor Pape, because in the case of Palestine, we don't have natural forces. As in many other disasters in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and others, we have names, groups, positions, interests, strategies, and many tactics of specific political elites, groups of people who have taken the decisions and have designed the strategies to occupy the Palestinian land. It's not a natural catastrophe. And in the case of Palestine, it's true that in 1948, marks the beginning of a disaster when David Ben-Gurion and his cronies proclaimed the State of Israel. But according to research of people like Abdel-Jawad Saleh or Abiz Musleh, we had land confiscations before that year, and even we had massacres before that year. So Nakba started in practice many years before 1948. If we talk the before 48, we will find conditions in the ground that would not be so different from what they could be after that year, and they are not different what we have today. This was because Nakba in that time was clearly supported by transnational elites from England, France, US, and other Western countries, and even inside the UN General Assembly in New York, when the debate was very hard, and the Zionist lobby worked to the last minute to win the UN recognition of one state of Israel. I will quote Professor Jaime Isla when he talks about the role of IT in that votation. It was crucial, the vote of 80. So if we talk the before 1948, or the 48, we can say many things and show lots of evidence to argue that disaster in Palestine was there even before that year, as I said before. But what we cannot say in the history of catastrophes is that Nakba has finished. We don't have one after Nakba yet. In other words, disaster in Palestine has not ended. We have one before, we don't have an after. And in this very particular case, I will to argue that we have a huge space in between before and now. A huge space in between where Nakba has been extended by Israeli military, by Israeli political elites, by Israeli political leaders, in one moment when we still have land confiscations, massacres, settlers, just like many years ago. And that's why, in my argument, it's important, the global intifada. We have to have a good orientation in order to do a global intifada. Handala is our guide, our intellectuals, our students, our colleagues, If we have a very good orientation, if we have the knowledge of names of people in Palestine who have resisted from many years ago, if we know, for example, names like Mahmoud Darwish, Ghassan Kanafani, Elia Suleiman, Handala Naji Ali, Fawaz Tukan, and if we know names like, for example, Saeed Abu Hishler, Rafif Siadeh, Hafiz Omar, Nasr Abdallah Sassis Alayan, Samia Halabi, Nabil Anani, Aisha Sansur, and many other names, Ilan Pape, if we have a very good orientation, the global intifada can be even more effective, even more useful. All of these names are, in fact, a global intifada. A global intifada is not only a present time, it's not in present tense, it's everyday tense. Everyday tense, with lectures, with seminars, but also with watching, we inform, with solidarity with other movements, and so on. That's why the idea of global intifada, for me, is useful, active, and powerful. Because we are in one moment where Israel and its leaders, Netanyahu and company, have lost legitimacy and credibility. Some years ago, if someone said something about Israel, he could be dismissed and called a follower of anti-Semitism. Now, we can say many things, but still it's necessary to do more. Because the responsible actors to expand the occupation, the people who are the responsible for this space in between, are still in the process, are still in power, and they are following the original ideas of military occupation, the ideas that Professor Pape talked yesterday about, following even the techniques of land confiscations and improving physical and psychological forms of violence and transgression. So that's why I'm really grateful with my colleagues and with you, because we have to make a connection between many generations, people who are working, who have worked, and who will work for Palestine and with Palestine. And thank you very much, Dr. Habashi. Thank you very much, Dr. Pape. And thank you, everyone, for coming and for making possible this conference together.
Muchas gracias, Moisés. Y vamos a pasar entonces a una ronda de preguntas. Vamos a tomar 3 preguntas juntas para que después las pueda contestar el doctor Habashi. Si nos apoyan con el micrófono, por favor. Allá arriba hay una pregunta.
Hello. It's a little bit complicated, but I'm going to try to explain myself, okay? There's a wing of intellectuals in Latin America and Mexico. A wing of intellectuals are claiming, and I quote, Palestinization of Mexico and Latin America. We've seen many governments in Latin America to join, including the Mexican government. I'm ashamed of knowing this, but joining against Venezuela, for example, we've seen all over Latin America a big division between left and right, and we could think that it's being followed in a strategy to divide Latin America, to attack ideologically Mexico and its image. So my question would be, what is the role of Latin America and in this specific timing Mexico on the, as you say, global antifada? How is possible for Latin America and Mexico defend from imperialism, interest in economic and political powers?
Marcela, if you don't mind, I'll try to answer each question, because I'm very forgetful and... But I will be short, so there is more time. Thank you, first of all, for sharing this notion of Palestinization. First of all, I disagree with the concept of Palestinization. Mexico has its own particularity. Venezuela has its own particularity. Right now, United States, we are facing a monstrosity of rise of neo-Nazi fascism, etc. So we can take, as I try to explain, sort of both political but also theoretical inspiration from the way over 100 years now Palestinians have resisted, learned from it, but then a specific case of Mexico, or a specific case of Venezuela, or a specific case of Colombia, any country, they also have something to contribute to our general understanding how to resist. United States, as you know, has been on the case. Right now, they're petrified. Oh, the Russians interfered in our election. They have been intervening in other people's election for longer than we want to remember. I'm sitting right in front of you, born 1951. 2 years old I was that they dismantled the democratic elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh by arranging for a military coup in my country. So I would be the last person to have sympathy for, oh, they intervened in our election. I mean, I don't even want to talk about the obscenity of the Democratic Party corruption of sabotaging Sanders' election, including Obama, in order to pop up Hillary Clinton. So each one of them are specific. But I refer to something that Ilan said yesterday, that colonialism is not just an event, but a structure. The same is imperial domination. Right now, the military logic that yesterday culminated in Donald Trump's speech about, in effect, he said, war without end. I'm not going to tell you where I'm going to attack. I'm not going to, and then what is the result? There is no result. This is the current logic. This was not the logic of Obama. Obama had what I call de-Zionization of American imperialism. He wanted to decouple Zionism from thing, but then gave $320 billion arms before he left White House. If we consider imperialism and colonialism a structure, a dynamic that learns from its mistakes and tries to reformulate and recalibrate itself for a very simple reason, okay, 1%, 99%, very simple reason, destruction of the earth for immediate benefits, fossil fuel, etc. And some key statistics, okay? Statistically, according to UN, 850 million human beings go to bed hungry every night. 850 million. The question whether they are African, Latin American, Muslim, non-Muslim is irrelevant. So we need to de-ethnicize the question of resistance. Okay? Not all Palestinians are God's gift to humanity. There are Palestinians in Chile who are supporters of Pinochet. So we don't fetishize any nation and any particular people. The dynamics of, here is my point, the dynamics of resistance and overcoming must be steps ahead of the dynamics of domination and imperialism, not reactive but proactive. We should not wait to see what Trump is doing and then react to it. And in each case, the case of Venezuela, of course, the US is after dismantling Venezuela, but that's not in question. The question is resistant via addressing. There must be some legitimate, however manipulative the CIA / are doing with Venezuela. There must be questions of hunger, scarcity of food, scarcity of resources that are global or not specific to Venezuela. Venezuela has certain resources and has tons of issues. How do they match? Okay? And here, the left faces a fundamental issue. When Chavez disregards the appeal of labor unions in Iran and sides with Ahmadinejad, we are in trouble. Not because we side with CIA, conspiring against Chavez at the time, but with the fact that there must be a line of solidarity between labor unions in Iran and what they go through and precisely the identical aspirations of Venezuela or any other country. Site-specific, that's my single important. Site-specific connected to global context.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Ahí.
Hi, I have a question. What is the thing the world can change about the thing is going on in Palestine and between Iraq? How the world can change what is going on in Palestine and Iraq? The problems and...
The Palestinians and Iraq?
Yeah.
I don't get it. What is the question?
Si la quieres decir en español.
Yeah, say it in Spanish and Marcela will translate for me.
El problema que se está viviendo en Irak y en la parte de Palestina, ¿cómo el mundo creen que lo pudieran cambiar? O sea, ¿qué es la parte del mundo? ¿O cómo el mundo se vería si eso se cambiaría? O sea, ¿qué puede hacer el mundo por cambiar eso? ¿Y cómo se beneficiaría esto para que en otros países no pase?
¿Palestina e Irak?
Bueno, Palestina. O sea, el problema que se está viviendo en Palestina.
Okay, yeah, I guess so. It's how the world would change if the problem in Palestine or the Iraqi problem were solved. And
I think the common sense.
You have your crystal ball with
I think the common way of other countries in the Middle East do in order to contention.
Okay, I don't. Let me. I'm not quite sure if I understand the question, but let me just say this. There are Palestinians in every single Arab country, including Iraq. And Palestinians have made some disastrous political decisions, such as siding with Saddam Hussein as part of their historical struggle. But the minute there is an uprising in any one of these countries, Palestinians are first to be blamed. My own dear friend, Noura, my colleague from UC Davis, she was Egyptian, active during the Egyptian revolution. She was beaten up and accused of you're a Palestinian. So anti-Palestinian sentiments in certain Arab countries, as much as pro-Palestinian sentiments, is a legitimate fact. Now, if I understand your question of Iraq correctly, in Iraq you had a freaking dictator, I just owe you another $1, in charge, Saddam Hussein. And so the question is, should you allow for a dictator to continue, or should you advocate regime change or so-called humanitarian intervention? That's another way that I can read your question. That I remember during the Libyan uprising, Libyan revolution. I was being interviewed and somebody asked me, the reporter, because the question among the left was, should NATO intervene or should NATO and US not intervene? Because we were led to believe that Gaddafi will slaughter Libyans. That's a legitimate political question. To which my answer was, to that reporter, when some of my colleagues, Princeton, SOAS, received $1 million from Libya to write essays that Libya is Finland or Norway of North Africa, did you see my name among those? How come now that Obama is about to drop, now suddenly, when Obama sold millions of dollars of military to Gaddafi, did he ask my opinion? How come now that we are put in a position that he may slaughter Libyans, then suddenly the reporter said, Obama is on the line. What would you say? I said, I would say, if he invades, I will call him an imperialist. If he does not interfere and Libya, Gaddafi does what he does, I hold him responsible for having sold a military thing. That's the position of any simple citizen, human being. I'm not in a position to tell them. They don't ask me opinion. This is as much as I can say about the question that I'm not quite sure if I understood, but...
Aquí adelante, por favor.
Good afternoon. I have a question. What's the role between geopolitical interests between Israel and the United States? Because Netanyahu is an ally of Trump. So he also said that he supported that Trump is trying to build a wall between Mexico and the United States. So what do you think about the roles between their geopolitical interests?
Very good question. The geopolitical interest between United States and Israel is far beyond any administration. The Israeli propaganda machinery through organizations such as AIPAC has made it integral to the DNA of United States that they are indispensable to the military interests of United States in the region, and they are in fact indispensable to the military interests of United States. So these masses of billions of dollars that the US gives to Israel is in fact for its own interests. Israel has developed a symbiotic relationship with not just any administration, in the Congress, in the military establishment, that it is indispensable to the military interests. And because the military interests are actually amorphous,